All right, so I've been getting a lot of questions about weight cutting, and especially my philosophy of transitioning fat weight into water weight, and how you could be losing somewhere between 4 to 6 pounds in a practice, plus on top of that, losing somewhere between 5 to 8 within 12 hours of weigh-ins, and how to accomplish this. A lot of people have been asking me, so I'm just going to explain the science. If you're not a big science person, that's okay. I'm going to dumb it down a lot and make it understandable so that anybody can implement it. Now, as we get started, there's 3 things that we need to know, and this all fits together. So there's 3 heart rate ranges that we're going to strategically use in order to get our body into this metabolic state that wants to burn fat instead of carbohydrates. Why do we want to do this? So the way this works is we're going to draw a graph, and this is our heart rate. Your body works based off of your heart rate. So there's 3 heart rate ranges. The first one ends at about 135, 140 beats per minute. It depends on your muscle density, your metabolism, so that range is a little flexible, but somewhere between 120 up to 140 beats per minute, you're going to be burning mostly carbohydrates. Now, this is just your body staying alive. This is your body doing normal day-to-day activities, plus like low intensity exercise. So something where you're not working super hard and you're just kind of going through the motions a little bit. That's up to 140 beats per minute. So we're going to mark this here. This is 140 right here. So that's range number 1. What this is called is glycolysis. So your body is metabolizing carbohydrates to stay alive and to get the low intensity exercise completed. So it's glycolysis. We're going to write that down here. So that's range number 1. Range number 2 is from that 135, 140 beats per minute up to 155 beats per minute. Now, this second range, your body is moving away from carbohydrates. Why? Because carbohydrates only provide 4 calories per gram. Fats, on the other hand, provide 9 calories per gram. So as the intensity of your exercise increases and your caloric demands increase, your body needs to put out a higher density of calories in every single second or moment that it's digesting. So it starts to utilize the fats instead of the carbohydrates, as opposed to digesting twice the amount of carbohydrates. So this research shows between 140 and 155 beats per minute, this is lipolysis. That's when your body starts to metabolize fat, and that's the heart rate zone that as wrestlers we're in most of the time, because wrestling is a super high intensity sport. We need to perform at the highest level, which means that we're going to have to train hard, which means that we're going to have to compete hard. We're going to be very active for 6 minutes. It's going to be a 6-minute sprint. That's not something a lot of sports can do. So we want to be in that fat burning state to be able to perform our best. Now, we're going to write this up on the board. So range number 2 ends at 155, and this is lipolysis. I know I have bad handwriting. We're not trying to win any grades for a handwriting here. So range number 3 now is above 155 beats per minute. Keep in mind that this is an unsustainable range. Above 155, our caloric demands are too high for our body to keep up with, because it wants to burn both glycolysis and lipolysis in an attempt to meet those caloric demands. But your body can't sustain that. 1, it can't sustain it, and 2, it's not healthy to sustain it. So above 155, that's both glycolysis and lipolysis. You're going to be burning both carbs and fats. So third range, that's glycolysis and lipolysis. Now, if you're one of those people that in practice you're still only losing like 1 or 2 pounds, part of the reason might be is that your heart rate just isn't high enough. Keep in mind that if our heart rate's not high enough, then we're not in that fat burning state, right? And in order for our body to, 1, lose fat, but 2, sweat, we need to get our body temperature high enough and then rest it in order to produce a sweat reaction. That's a sweat reflex. We can't do that unless our heart rate gets high enough to be able to provide enough body temperature that your body responds by trying to cool itself down through sweating. So get your heart rate high, allow your body to get hyped up, get your heart rate up, and then that sweat reaction will happen. So if you're feeling like that's not happening while you're in practice, there's one easy way to measure this, and they're called ventilatory thresholds. Now, ventilatory thresholds meshes up with this perfectly, and you'll see why. So up in that first range, up to 135, 140 beats per minute, that is ventilatory threshold 1 when we're burning carbohydrates. And the way you measure this is being able to talk comfortably while you're working out. So if I'm able to drill or run or weightlift or whatever it is, and I'm able to hold a full conversation with whoever I'm next to, then I'm in ventilatory threshold 1. So we'll write that here. So V1. So ventilatory threshold 2, where we want to be as wrestlers and competitors, is being able to talk, but not very comfortably. So it might be getting out a sentence and then having to breathe a little bit, and then getting able to get in another sentence and then needing to breathe a little bit. So it's a little more difficult to talk while you're working out. That's ventilatory threshold 2. So if you're working out and you're able to hold a full conversation with your partner, which one we shouldn't be doing anyways, but if you're able to do that, then you're in range number 1. You're in ventilatory threshold number 1, and your heart rate's not high enough to really get into that fat burning state that we want to be in. Plus, the heart rate's not high enough to be able to perform how we want to perform. So make sure you're measuring that as we go. So we'll write ventilatory threshold number 2 up on the board. Now there's range number 3, above 155 beats per minute. This is ventilatory threshold number 3. So if you're working out and it's almost impossible to talk, like you're only able to get in a word or two, that's how you know your heart rate is too high, and that's at an unsustainable range. So if that's the case and you're only able to get in a word or two, then you know that it's time to pull back, to dial back a little bit. Your body will adjust, your heart rate will die down a little bit, and it'll kick in some extra resources to try to keep up with the caloric demands. But if you're to that point, then it's time to dial it back a little bit. Most people don't get to that point because they don't push themselves that hard. Most people think they're in range number 2, but they're actually in range number 1. So we need to make sure that we're measuring our ventilatory threshold to be in range number 2 so that we can perform our best and use those fat resources like we want to. So we'll write it up on the board, ventilatory threshold number 3. So the whole purpose behind this plan is to be able to burn fats and maintain our carbohydrates within our system so that when we go to compete at tournaments, we have the carbs in our system to be able to perform, right? Because we always start here. Like your heart rate doesn't start above 140. We start at the low level. And we need to be able to have carbs in our system to get up to the 140 to then go into the fat burning system so our energy output can be a lot higher while we're competing. But if we don't ever get to that point, and not to mention if we don't have the fats in our system to be able to compete at that level, then we're kind of holding ourselves back, and we're also holding our performance back too. Now, if we're on a meal plan that prioritizes fats, and that's what we got in our system, but we don't ever reach ventilatory threshold 2, then you see why it's kind of a little counterintuitive, but slightly a waste of time to do that, because if you're only in ventilatory threshold number 1, then you're never burning the fats that you're putting into your system, so it doesn't really serve a purpose. Which a lot of runners, like their heart rates don't get that high because it's very steady state, right? But as a wrestler, when you're going sprint, slow down, sprint, slow down, sprint, slow down, your heart rate's going to spike pretty easy. So it's going to be above 140. But we need to make sure that we have the energy in our system to be able to handle that caloric output, because that's where we want to be. That's where our energy level is going to be high, and our wrestling is going to be our best. If you guys have any questions about what I've just explained or anything about this graph, leave me a message, leave me a comment, let me know how I can help.